the State Capture Commission directly implicates the governing party in acts of corruption. The report finds that the ANC accepted substantial financial and other support from Bosasa for the party's 2014 election. It notes that this provision of assistance by Bosasa was provided to ensure that the ANC, as well as senior ANC office bearers, remained in office to allow Bosasa to be able to continue accessing government programs and tenders.
Let's talk more about the State Capture report, this latest installment. To help us do that, we're joined tonight by political analysts Professor Christi van der Westhuizen, Rebone Ndou, and Levy Ndou. My thanks to you all. Thank you so much for being on the program. Rebone, if I can start with you, the DA leader John Steenhuisen says what this report and previous ones prove. He says, in fact, he's likened the ANC to an organized crime syndicate. Is that a fair comparison to make based on the findings?
Well, since an organized crime syndicate is very interesting, but the result of the matter is that the ANC is in a serious crisis, especially after this report. And why I say that, they talk about the war room, and war room of the ANC is only established during elections, So that shows that Bosasa was running that machinery of the ANC at the time. And now the question is that whether this was the head of elections who asked for assistance or the TG. But the reality of the matter that the ANC is in a serious crisis. This is not about individuals, but this is about an organization. And that shows that moving forward, the ANC will have to look at ways of fundraising.
Professor Christi van der Westhuizen, Rebone says the ANC is facing a crisis. We know the party has set up a team basically to process the findings of the state capture inquiry. But even that work is unlikely to be a smooth process given how divided the party's leaders themselves are on whether this was a necessary process and indeed the implementation itself of the findings.
Oh, good evening. Very good to be with you this evening. I have to say, to question whether this was a necessary process, for me, actually speaks of not taking South Africans seriously, not being serious about the citizens of this country and what they deserve. So to question whether we should be confronting corruption, to question whether we should be rooting out corruption, for me, actually speaks of an agenda that actually advances corruption, that tries to justify and legitimize corruption. So I think that's absolutely unacceptable. It speaks actually of politicians who are really thumbing their noses at the people of this country. We must take into account that we lost something like between $500 billion and $1 trillion rands over those 9 last years. And that's an incredible amount of money. If you think and look at the state of the state-owned enterprises now, to rebuild them is going to take an incredibly long time. If you think of the job creation possibilities that have been lost in the process, how many opportunities we could have created, local economic development opportunities that we so desperately need, that have now been lost. All that money that's siphoned off. We don't even have a proper grasp on how much money we've lost. If you look at this whole at what the president had said, that it was between $500 billion and $1 trillion. So that's an incredible amount of money. Even if it's $500 billion. So absolutely we do have to confront corruption, and the Zondo Commission has been invaluable in terms of really grappling with the extent of state capture and how far it went and the techniques as well. Mm-hmm. And out of it now come very, very strong recommendations also in terms of how can we strengthen our state to really serve the people of this country and to make sure that our officials and our politicians are in the state, not to abuse its resources for their own reasons, but to actually really help South Africans. We're in a socio-economic crisis, and we really need this.
Okay. Levy, let me come to you. Gwede Mandashe, in a briefing in the last hour, has already said that he's not going to step down because there isn't solid enough evidence linking him to actual impropriety, corruption, fraud, any kind of wrongdoing. The broader question then becomes, how much of a culture of accountability exists in the ANC of today?
Well, Tembekile, I think the first point will be that the state capture report, it's a step in the right direction in the sense that some degree of accountability and ordinary citizens and everyone has come to know what has been going on between the ANC and Bosasa and other entities. Number two, I think also Gwede Mantashe, like any other individual, would in the first instance try his best to prove himself innocent. But what I picked up from the report is that indeed the report says maybe if there is a further investigation to be made, something can then be found against Gwede Mantashe. Now the question for me would be, was it then necessary for Gwede Mantashe to call a press conference today? And in my humble view, I don't think it was necessary, because the finalization of the report is still on its way. The president still has to outline the different processes or steps that is going to be taking. His own party, the ANC, has got a specialized committee to deal with matters that relates to the state capture report. So I think he actually ran a bit faster. But I think also at the same time, one is looking at Gwede Mantashe as one individual who is mentioned in the report, but who now has a cloud hanging over his head. And what he's trying to do is to try his best to remove that cloud. But the issue at hand is that the commission says if it's investigated, something can be found, and nobody is immune from being investigated.
Let me take then the point you're making about the cloud, Levy, and bring it to you, Rebone. So there is a cloud, there isn't a criminal finding against the minister, only a recommendation that he indeed be subjected to an investigation to that effect. The ANC's got a committee that will make a draft way in which the party is going to process the findings of this inquiry process. At cabinet level, Mantashe is a minister. What should the president do? Can he afford to wait for June when he presents to Parliament the intention to deal with the report, or should the minister be removed?
I mean, what we can say, I mean, we know that the president, I mean, when it comes to issues of whether reshuffling, he takes time. We can go back to the saga of the former Minister of Health. You know, the president took time to act until the minister himself decided to go and leave, and later he handed his resignation letter to go and clear his name. So I think as things stand, the president is finding himself in a very difficult position. And what I will say is that you must remember that Gwede Mantashe is the initial chair of the ANC. The ANC is due to go to its policy or NGC between June or July. The dates are not yet clear. The ANC is due to go to its national conference. Now, the national chair of the ANC plays a very critical role during these processes, because they give direction towards the meeting in terms of how delegates will be, because we know that the battle lines are there. There will be those who will be disruptive. So the national chair plays a very critical role during this time of the ANC conferences. So he finds himself in a very difficult position, because even if he can remove him as the minister, now comes to the party, he might find himself being open up for attacks at these gatherings of the ANC, where the national chair will just allow it. So, and just to add on, then you've got Nomvula Mkwenyane, who's the head of organizing, who deals with branches and the auditing process of the ANC. So it is going to be a very difficult way for Cyril to find ways to navigate. Now he needs to show whether is he a politician or what, because these are going to be very difficult months for him to navigate going to the 55th conference of the ANC.
Professor van der Westhuizen, let's end with you then, just on the point that Rebone was making about the internal dynamics, especially in such a crucial year where the ANC is going to elect its next leaders and some will wish to be re-elected. Are we back to a scenario where the party now has to again weigh whether it prioritizes the personal ambitions of its leaders, the ambitions of the party, before or above those of the country? Is that where we're back at?
I'm afraid it does look like that. And the fact of the matter is that's why we actually need our state entities now and our law enforcement agencies specifically now to step up to the plate, to start acting on the evidence that's been provided by the Zondo Commission. And there are also many other steps that can be taken apart from the law enforcement agencies. Assets can be frozen. We can reclaim the monies. We've already gotten billions back from companies like Bain and so forth. The actions that we can take to, remember, there were 20 company directors that have been named as well that should be investigated for prosecution. Those company directors must be looked into. While we're waiting for those prosecutions, they can be declared delinquent if one approaches the court. But there's a time cap on that as well. That has to happen within 2 years of the person being a director at that company and so forth. So there are many steps that we can actually take in the meantime, using various mechanisms in our society to really bring people to book. I don't think we should be waiting on internal ANC processes. We actually need our various state agencies now to step up to the plate. And also our companies, our private sector has a lot to answer for in this case.
All right, thank you very much for that. That was political analysts, Professor Christi van der Westhuizen, Rebone Ndou, and Levy, Ndou, speaking to us then as we all digest these 1,000 pages from the latest state capture report released about, just under 24 hours ago now.